When you hear a claim like, hurt an avoidance ego and they will love you madly, it sounds like a secret shortcut to devotion. But what it's really describing is a nervous system alarm that can look like attachment. An avoidant is not a robot with no feelings. Many are deeply feeling people who learn to protect themselves by controlling distance. So when their ego gets hit, when they feel replaced, outpaced, or suddenly uncertain of your availability, they can swing into a sharp, urgent pursuit. To you, that urgency can feel like obsession. The messages become frequent. The tone becomes softer. The interest becomes intense. And if you've been craving consistency, it can feel like a miracle. But that spike is often fear in a romantic costume. Ego pain creates scarcity. Scarcity creates urgency. Urgency can create pursuit. But none of that automatically equals healthy love. It can be a reflex to restore control, to soothe shame, or to protect identity. The avoidant may not even understand why they're suddenly pulled toward you. They just feel the internal threat of losing access to someone who mattered more than they admitted. This is why ego-triggered obsession can be misleading. You're not necessarily seeing a new emotional capacity. You may be seeing a temporary override of their usual deactivation, driven by fear of loss rather than readiness for intimacy. This is where the empath's heart can get trapped, because that sudden intensity feels validating. It says you mattered. It says they do care. It says maybe I was right to wait. And yes, you did matter. But you must separate being missed from being chosen with consistency. A person can want you intensely when their ego is threatened and still retreat when closeness requires steady emotional responsibility. Panic can mimic the heat of love while skipping the structure of love. It can sound like devotion while still lacking the habits that form real safety. The true test is what happens after the alarm quiets. When the ego-centered fear fades, the old patterns often try to re-enter. The avoidant may relax, the texts may slow, the accountability may soften into vagueness. The I need space may return. That's not because your value disappeared. It's because the underlying fear of intimacy was never healed. It was just temporarily overshadowed by the fear of losing you. If a relationship relies on ego injury, jealousy, or psychological pressure to keep someone emotionally engaged, you end up with a push-pull cycle that trains both nervous systems to treat threat as romance. There is a cost to you too. The more you believe you must hurt their ego to be loved, the more you teach your own heart that your calm presence isn't enough. You start associating love with strategy instead of mutual care. You start equating safety with anxiety spikes. You begin to believe that pain is your leverage. That mindset doesn't strengthen your value. It compromises your peace. It turns your relationship into a chessboard instead of a home. And there is a cost to them. An avoidant pulled back by ego pain is not necessarily being guided into growth. They may be pulled into a power struggle. Instead of learning how to repair through vulnerability, they learn how to chase relief. Instead of learning to stay present through discomfort, they learn to reassert control when they feel threatened. That doesn't heal the pattern. It reinforces it. So, if you ever witness an avoidant looking obsessed after an ego hit, don't confuse that moment with a reliable foundation. Watch what follows. Do they take responsibility without excuses? Do they name the impact of their distance? Do they initiate steady communication before things break down? Do they respect your boundaries, even when the relationship is calm and ordinary? Or do they only intensify when they feel you slipping away and then drift back into avoidance the moment your warmth returns? The healthier truth is that avoidants do not need their ego wounded to love you well. They need conditions that invite courage and consistency. Your most powerful trigger is not humiliation, it is self-respect. When you stop rewarding inconsistency, when you stop over-functioning well, you remain warm but no longer chase. You create clarity without cruelty. You replace games with reality. And reality is the only place where secure love can grow, because panic might bring someone back fast, but only maturity can keep someone present for real. An avoidant comes closer more reliably when you stop abandoning yourself, because self-abandonment is the fuel that keeps the old cycle alive. When you chase, over-explain, or shrink your needs to keep the peace, you're not just trying to save the relationship, you're teaching the dynamic a quiet rule. If you pull away, I will do more. And to an avoidant nervous system, that rule feels comfortable. It lets them keep control of distance, while you carry the emotional weight. They don't have to fully face their inconsistency because your loyalty keeps softening the consequences of it. Emotional sovereignty changes that rule without aggression. It's not cold, It's not petty, it's not designed to punish. It's you becoming so grounded in your worth that your peace no longer depends on their mood. You stay warm, you stay human, you stay authentic, but you stop turning your love into a rescue mission. You stop doing emotional overtime to compensate for someone else's avoidance. That shift is not a game. It's a boundary with dignity. Avoidants often fear intimacy, but many also fear being trapped in expectations they don't know how to meet. When you show up with emotional sovereignty, you remove the frantic energy that can feel like pressure to them. You're no longer trying to pull closeness out of them with anxiety. You're creating a calm, stable environment where closeness becomes an invitation, not a demand. That is why this approach is more reliable. It doesn't activate their escape reflex the way chasing can. It communicates safety and self-respect at the same time. Being warm, grounded, and boundaried is a rare emotional signature. Warmth signals that the connection is real, that you are not playing tough just to win. Groundedness signals that you are stable even when the relationship feels uncertain. Boundaries signal that your love is not a free-for-all. This combination quietly says, I'm here for something healthy, not something confusing, and that message lands deeply with an avoidant, even if they don't have the language for it yet. Here's the truth most people miss. Avoidants tend to respect what is consistent. They may not always respond perfectly, but they notice emotional integrity. They notice when you stop begging for basics. They notice when your standards become actions instead of speeches. They notice when you are not trying to control them, but you are also no longer controllable through distance. Your emotional sovereignty interrupts the push-pull rhythm and replaces it with something clearer, mutual effort or natural consequence. This is also why you must understand the difference between a boundary and a bluff. A boundary is not I'm leaving if you don't change tomorrow. A boundary is I will not stay in a pattern that consistently hurts me. It is calm, it is factual, and is backed by behavior. When an avoidant senses that your boundary is real, your energy becomes different. You aren't waiting for them to rescue your self-worth with a text. You aren't bargaining your needs down to keep them comfortable. You are centered. And centered people are harder to manipulate, harder to ignore, and harder to take for granted. Emotional sovereignty also protects you from misreading temporary spikes as transformation. If an avoidant suddenly moves closer because you've stopped chasing, that can be a promising sign, but you don't hand over your heart at full speed. You watch for consistency. You watch whether they can stay present when there's no crisis pushing them to act. You watch if they can do repair without you doing the emotional heavy lifting. Your sovereignty makes you wise enough to allow growth without sacrificing your safety. And if you're the empath, this is where your healing becomes visible. You stop confusing love with endurance. You stop treating patience like a personality requirement. You stop believing that if you just love harder, they will become braver. Instead, you love smarter. You love with self-respect. You love in a way that doesn't require you to go emotionally bankrupt to keep the bond alive. The paradox is that when you stop abandoning yourself, you feel more attractive to yourself first. You reclaim your nervous system. You sleep better. You think clearer. You stop obsessing over their silence because your identity is no longer tied to their availability. And that inner shift is often what makes an avoidant finally see what they couldn't fully appreciate before. Your presence was not guaranteed, your love was not endless tolerance, and your value was never dependent on their readiness. So, the most reliable way to change the dynamic isn't to injure an ego or trigger panic. It's to become the kind of person who will not trade dignity for connection. That energy doesn't force an avoidant to love you. It simply makes it clear that if they want you, they must meet you in something real, consistent, and emotionally safe. And whether they rise to that or not, you win either way, because you no longer lose yourself to keep someone else close. The most powerful shift isn't manipulation. It's you refusing to reward inconsistency and refusing to be the one who keeps the connection alive alone. Because that is where the entire avoidant empath cycle quietly gets its oxygen. For a long time, you may have been the emotional engine. You might not have called it that. You might have called it love, patience, understanding, empathy, but functionally, you were the one who bridged the silence, softened the tension, reopened the door, sent the message that fixed the mood, explained the same need in 10 different ways, and held the relationship together when their nervous system shut down. That's not a character flaw. That's a beautiful capacity, but it becomes dangerous when your capacity turns into their comfort zone. Because then, the relationship isn't mutual, it's maintained. Inconsistency survives when it still gets rewarded. It gets rewarded when they pull away and you chase. It gets rewarded when they go vague and you over-explain. It gets rewarded when they disappear, and you accept a quick comeback without real repair. It gets rewarded when they offer crumbs, and you treat them like a feast because you're exhausted and hungry for stability. Every time you rescue the dynamic from the consequences of their distance, you unintentionally teach the pattern that it works, not because you are weak, but because you are loyal. But loyalty to a pattern that repeatedly hurts you becomes self-abandonment wearing a noble mask. This is why refusing to reward inconsistency is such a radical act of self-respect. It isn't dramatic. It isn't cruel. It isn't an ego attack. It's a quiet recalibration of reality. It's you internalizing a new truth. Love cannot be built on your anxiety and their avoidance. Love cannot be a one-person maintenance job. Love can't ask you to be strong enough for two nervous systems forever. A relationship where you're constantly doing the emotional labor to prevent disconnection isn't intimacy, it's emergency management. So when you make this shift, you stop trying to force consistency out of someone who only gives it when they feel threatened. You stop treating their momentary softness as proof that the structure is safe. You start paying attention to what happens in the calm parts, not just in the crisis moments. Because the avoidance pattern often looks like this: distance, your pursuit, their temper, return, your relief, and then distance again once the pressure fades. That is not love stabilizing, that is a cycle repeating. Refusing to reward inconsistency means that when they retreat, you don't sprint after them with your dignity in your hands. You don't punish them either. You simply stop participating in the emotional imbalance. You let their choice be their choice. You let your standards be your standards. You communicate clearly once, and then you protect your peace. That's the part that feels terrifying at first. Because your heart might say, if I don't fix this, I'll lose them. But your nervous system quietly responds, if I keep fixing this alone, I'll lose myself. This shift is where you stop being the person who keeps love alive through self-erasure. And this is where the dynamic changes. Often, an avoidant is used to the relationship feeling safe because you are over-functioning. Your emotions smooth the edges. Your empathy minimizes the consequences. Your patience keeps the door open long after it should have required repair. So when you stop rewarding inconsistency, the avoidant faces something they can no longer avoid. The relationship will not be carried by your emotional labor anymore. That reality can feel like an ego hit to them. But it's not you attacking their ego, it's you removing the cushion. This is also where you reclaim your power in the healthiest way. Not by trying to make them obsessed, not by creating jealousy, not by playing mind games, but by ending the silent contract that said, I will hold us together even if you don't. You learn to say, with your behavior, I want love, but I will not finance it alone. You learn to recognize that consistency is not a luxury. It's a requirement for emotional safety. You don't accept the argument that your needs are too much when you're asking for basic presence and respectful communication. And here's the truth that sets you free. This shift is not primarily about changing them. It's about changing your relationship with yourself. When you stop rewarding inconsistency, you stop training your own heart to accept unpredictability as normal. You stop conditioning your nervous system to equate love with uncertainty. You begin to feel your own center again. You stop waking up to analyze their mood. You stop living on an emotional treadmill. You start building a life where your peace is not constantly held hostage by someone else's avoidance. If they rise to meet you with consistent effort, accountability, and repair, then you will see it over time, not in a single emotional surge. If they don't, you will also see that clearly, without having to self-destruct to prove your point. Either way, you win. Because you stop paying for connection with your self-worth. You stop keeping the relationship alive alone. You stop confusing endurance with love. And you finally choose a standard of intimacy that requires two people who are willing to show up, not one person who is willing to suffer quietly just to keep the story going. Obsession and commitment can look similar at the surface, but they are built on completely different emotional engines. And if you confuse them, you can mistake a nervous system emergency for real love. Obsession is fear dressed up as intensity. It is the frantic energy of someone who feels their control slipping, their identity threatened, or their access to you suddenly at risk. It can show up as dramatic texts, urgent apologies, sudden affection, and a rush of attention that feels like the love you've been starving for. But the hidden fuel is not stability, it's threat. It's the alarm that says I might lose this person, and that would make me feel small, left behind, rejected, replaced. In that state, an avoidant can seem wildly present, almost unrecognizable, because fear of loss temporarily overrides fear of intimacy. The problem is that fear cannot carry a relationship for long. It burns bright, fast, and then collapses back into the same old distance once the threat fades. Commitment is the opposite. Commitment is not a spike, it's a pattern. It is built on values, not adrenaline. It is rooted in the decision to protect what you love, not the panic of losing it. A committed person doesn't need you to disappear to remember your worth. They don't need your silence to suddenly become brave. They don't wait until your energy is gone to start behaving like you matter. They show up when things are calm, not only when things are cracking. They initiate repair before the relationship is on life support. They communicate because they respect the bond, not because their ego is afraid of being the one who got left. This matters deeply in avoidant dynamics because avoidant attachment can create a misleading rhythm that confuses even the strongest hearts. They soften when you detach. They intensify when you pull away, and they retreat again once you are back within reach. To a nervous system that has been starving for consistency, that surge can feel like destiny. It can feel like proof that your love was finally understood. But a surge is not a foundation. A desperate return is not the same as daily emotional courage. A late night I miss you is not the same as a steady I will show up differently, and you won't have to wonder. Obsession says, I can't lose you because it wounds my ego, my image, my sense of being wanted. Commitment says, I won't lose you because I am willing to do the everyday work that keeps love safe. Obsession is reactive and self-focused. Commitment is deliberate and bond-focused. Obsession is fueled by scarcity. Commitment is fueled by integrity. Obsession is loud in crisis. Commitment is consistent in normal life. Obsession tries to pull you back into proximity fast. Commitment moves at the pace of trust because it understands that trust is not rebuilt with intensity, it is rebuilt with reliability. If you've ever been caught in a push-pull cycle, you know how seductive obsession can feel. The intensity can feel like proof you are irreplaceable. The sudden pursuit can feel like a correction from months of emotional absence. Your mind may say, this is the breakthrough. Your heart may say, this is what I've waited for. But your wisdom has to ask a higher question. Will this effort survive the calm? Because real safety doesn't arrive as an emergency flare. It arrives as love that doesn't need a cliff edge to behave like love. This is why you must seek growth and repair, not anxiety-driven chasing. Growth looks like accountability without defensiveness. It looks like someone naming the impact of their distance without blaming you for needing closeness. It looks like them initiating communication before you reach your limit. It looks like consistency that survives busy weeks, misunderstandings, and ordinary life. Repair looks like them asking what you need to feel safe and then follow through again and again. Long after the emotional wave passes, it looks like them being willing to sit in discomfort instead of escaping it, willing to tolerate your feelings instead of calling your needs pressure. Anxiety-driven chasing is a false currency. It can buy temporary closeness, but it cannot buy lasting emotional security. When you chase someone who only becomes affectionate under the threat of loss, you teach the relationship that fear is the trigger for love. You end up trained to create distance just to receive effort, to go quiet just to be heard, to live in a loop where your anxiety funds their attention. That is not romance. That is conditioning. And it slowly convinces you that love must hurt to be real, that stability is boring, that calm is suspicious. So when an avoidant suddenly appears obsessed, don't let the spotlight of attention erase the timeline of patterns. Appreciate the vulnerability if it's real, but don't grant full access to your heart based on one emotional storm. Watch what happens next. Do they stay present when things are peaceful? Do they bring clarity instead of confusion? Do they respect your boundaries without punishing you with distance? Do they show up before you're at the edge, not only because they fear you're about to leave? Your standards don't make you harsh, they make you safe. You are not here to be someone's adrenaline hit. You are here to be someone's safe choice, chosen with steadiness, protected with consistency, and loved in a way that never requires you to disappear to become valuable. Calm love with firm standards is rare, and that rarity is exactly why it hits an avoidant so deeply. Because many avoidants have lived inside extremes for most of their relational lives. They've known people who chased them with anxiety, flooded them with pressure, and turned every emotional need into a crisis. And they've known people who went cold, cut them off, punished them, or used silence as a weapon. So their nervous system starts to believe love comes in two flavors: pursuit that feels suffocating, or distance that feels safer. Then they meet you, someone who doesn't fit the pattern. You're warm, but you don't beg. You're open, but you don't abandon yourself. You can love someone without turning your love into a plea for approval. And that combination creates something most avoidants rarely experience: respect mixed with safety. This is the crucial point. Calm love doesn't trigger their fear reflex the way frantic chasing can. You're not trying to pull feelings out of them by force. You're not interrogating their every mood shift. You're not demanding intimacy on a timeline that makes them panic. Your presence is steady. Your tone is grounded. Your communication is clear. So they feel less trapped around you. They can breathe. They can exist in connection without feeling like they're walking toward emotional ambush. That's the safety part. But then your standards make it even more powerful. Because you're not just easygoing. You're not the person who will tolerate confusion forever. You're not the person who will accept inconsistency as a personality trait. You don't collapse into anxiety when they pull away, and you don't punish them with cruelty either. You simply hold the line of self-respect. You're the kind of person who can say, I care about you, and also mean I won't carry this alone. That isn't intimidation. That is emotional adulthood. And an avoidant can feel the difference even before they can name it. Standards are not threats. They are truth. When you have calm standards, you become someone they can't control with distance. That is a big deal. Many avoidant dynamics survive because the other partner becomes the emotional compensator. They chase clarity. They soften every rupture. They keep the connection alive even when the avoidant shuts down. So the avoidant unconsciously learns, I can retreat, and the relationship will still be maintained. But you challenge that hidden contract, not with drama, with dignity. You don't try to win them back. You don't perform patience as self-erasure. You allow your boundaries to speak through your behavior. This is why calm love with firm standards creates respect. Because it signals that your affection is intentional, not desperate. Your patience is wise, not unlimited. Your empathy is real, but it isn't a loophole someone can use to keep you small. You aren't trying to be the safest option by sacrificing your needs. You are showing that safety can exist alongside expectation, that love can stay warm without becoming weak. To an avoidant, that can feel disorienting in the best way, because you are offering a third way they might not have experience with. A relationship that doesn't require fear to function. You are not chasing them into intimacy. You are not freezing them out to regain power. You are calmly requiring mutuality. That steadiness invites a different part of them to wake up. The part that wants real connection, the part that is tired of shallow coping. The part that secretly respects people who don't beg for what should be natural. But you must understand something important. Respect is not the same as readiness. An avoidant might feel deep respect for your calm standards and still struggle to meet them. They might be drawn to your stability and still default to old habits under stress. That is why your standards are not there to impress them. They are there to protect you, to keep you from being pulled back into cycles where your nervous system pays the price for someone else's fear. Your calm standards are also the best test of real change. Anyone can be affectionate in a panic. Anyone can say beautiful words when they feel you slipping away. But calm standards measure who someone is when there is no crisis forcing effort. They reveal whether someone can communicate before withdrawal becomes detach, whether they can repair without you doing the emotional labor for two, whether they can stay consistent when love is ordinary, not just urgent. So if you ever feel guilty for having standards, remember this. Standards are the language of self-respect in action. They are not cruelty. They are not punishment. They are not a refusal of love. They are the requirement that love be mutual, safe, and sustainable. And that is why you feel rare, because your love doesn't come with chaos. And your boundaries don't come with cruelty. You offer the kind of connection that says you can be human here, while also saying you must be responsible here. That balance is unforgettable. It doesn't just attract someone's attention. It challenges their emotional identity. It shows them a version of love that doesn't need games to be powerful. And whether they rise to meet it or not, you never lose yourself trying to prove that your love deserves to be honored. The true measure of change is consistent behavior over time, not dramatic returns or emotional spikes. And if you can really absorb this, you will protect your heart from the most dangerous illusion in avoidant dynamics. Because the avoidant comeback can be powerful. It can be emotional. It can be sudden. It can sound like everything you hope to hear after weeks or months of uncertainty. And when you've been the one holding your breath, craving clarity, waiting for softness that felt just out of reach, that dramatic return can feel like proof that love is finally becoming safe. But intensity is not evidence of stability. It's only evidence of a moment. Avoidants can surge toward you when they feel threatened by your silence, your detachment, your new boundaries, or the realization that your energy is no longer guaranteed. That surge can look like obsession, tenderness, even remorse, but a fear-triggered return is not the same thing as a maturity-driven change. Fear can produce urgency, but urgency doesn't automatically produce growth. Fear can create the appearance of emotional presence, but the real question is whether that presence survives the calm. Because anyone can show up when the relationship is on the edge. The real test is who they are when your love is available and your standards are steady, when there is no emergency forcing their nervous system to act. Consistency is where real love becomes measurable. It lives in their daily choices. It lives in how they communicate before you reach your limit, not after. It lives in whether they can stay emotionally present when the conversation is uncomfortable, not only when they are afraid of losing you. It lives in small, repeated actions that rebuild trust without needing a dramatic storyline. Consistency is unglamorous, but it is the only thing that truly calms your nervous system. It is the only thing that lets you breathe instead of brace. This matters because avoidant patterns often come with a misleading rhythm, distance, your pain, you're pulling back, their sudden return, your relief, and then the pattern slowly reappears once the threat of loss fades. That's why emotional spikes can be so confusing. Your heart wants to interpret them as a turning point. Your mind wants to attach hope to that moment. But your body remembers the cycle. Your body remembers how many times you were pulled into a burst of closeness that melted back into silence. A healthy standard is this: if the return is real, it will not need your anxiety to stay alive. When you measure change, you don't measure how intensely they miss you. You measure how consistently they respect you. You don't measure the beauty of one apology. You measure whether their behavior becomes predictable in the healthiest way. Are they communicating with clarity? Are they initiating repair? Are they respecting your boundaries without punishing you with withdrawal? Are they showing genuine accountability, not just emotional language? Are they building emotional safety when there is no crisis to motivate them? Because if their best version only appears when they fear losing you, then what you're seeing is a nervous system reaction, not a new relational identity. This is where you must become loyal to your standards, not just your feelings. Your feelings will naturally respond to a dramatic return. That's human, but standards are what protect you from emotional whiplash. Standards say, I am open to growth and I need to see it over time. Standards say, I will not reset the whole relationship based on one intense moment. Standards say, I don't need grand speeches. I need new patterns. And when you hold this line, you stop rewarding the cycle that has been draining you. You stop teaching the relationship that fear is the only way to access your heart. The most powerful thing you can do when an avoidant returns in a surge is to slow the timeline. Not to punish them, not to test them cruelly, but to protect reality. If they are truly changing, they will still be present when your boundaries are calm and your pace is wise. They will still show up when you're not chasing. They will still be consistent when the relationship becomes ordinary again. And if they disappear the moment things stabilize, you have your answer without having to break yourself to get it. This isn't about becoming suspicious or shutting your heart down. It's about upgrading the way you define proof. Proof is not a late-night confession. Proof is not a burst of affection. Proof is not panic masked as passion. Proof is the quiet, repeated decision to show up with reliability. Proof is emotional courage that lasts longer than a week. Proof is the kind of love that doesn't need you to withdraw to be valued. When you start living by this keynote, you stop being hypnotized by spikes and start being anchored by patterns. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And you give your nervous system the one thing it has been begging for all along: consistency that doesn't expire when the fear fades.